Hey, how's it going? This is a very different video from what I normally make because I usually just make progress videos, but with the 2022 Winter Summit, which just happened, it got me thinking about the future of the game, and more specifically about the potential for a new skill to be added into the game. And by the way, this is going to be a ramble video, so you can just listen to it in the background and you won't be missing much by not looking at the screen. But if you're used to watching my videos already, that's probably how you normally treat them. Anyways, the Winter Summit was basically Jagex announcing the major updates they have planned for the first half of 2023, and one of the announcements was the polling of a new skill, which is the reason why I'm making this video. What's currently happening is there's a poll you can vote on in-game right now whether or not you think there should be a new skill added. And it's not saying any specific skill, but just simply asking, do you want any new skill, yes or no? I will say before we get started with this, because I want to be transparent about my bias, is that I don't particularly want a new skill in the game. Not that I'm necessarily against one being added, but I've just never felt like the game was missing a skill, and thus have never felt like there needed to be a new one added. As I'm in the middle of creating this video, I'm coming back to the start to edit this part in right now, that Bodhi just uploaded a beautiful ramble video discussing a new skill and sailing, and I just agree with everything he said in his video, and I'm literally just ready to scrap this video, but I've gotten so far in this video already, and I'm just gonna keep going and finish it because I feel like at the very least I have different things to say, different reasonings, and more things to add on to what he was saying. I think there's a better chance than not that this poll will pass, especially since the passing threshold was pretty recently changed to 70% instead of 75% just a couple months ago. And so if we do end up in a scenario where there is going to be a new skill added and I had to pick one, I would pick sailing, and this video is meant to explain the reasons why. Or honestly, it could all be summarized with just one reason, which I will break down into many parts for you, but that one reason that it comes down to is nostalgia. Don't get me wrong, OSRS is not the same true original game that it was when it first came out in 2013, but I don't think it's meant to be at this point, considering it is a very, very, very different game than it was in 2013. So to say something needs to be nostalgic to be an old school isn't necessarily true. But the whole point of OSRS, to me at least, is that they restarted the game from 2007 and took the game in a different direction without removing wielding free trade, without microtransactions, and without evolution of combat. Originally, when Old School came out, I don't think it was meant to last a while. I think it was sort of like a last-ditch effort to keep current players interested in the game a bit longer, maybe bring some old players back, and just eventually fade over time. And if it wasn't for Jagex bumping up some of these thresholds that we didn't get enough votes for, who knows what would have happened to these OSRS servers. By the way, I voted in the OSRS referendum on multiple accounts at the time, which I don't know if that was against the rules, but I wouldn't be surprised if lots of other people did that too, and it all worked out well in the end, right? Okay, moving on. Why would sailing be nostalgic? It sounds kind of weird to say that because sailing never was a skill in RuneScape Classic or RuneScape 2 or RuneScape 3. HDRS was released July 1st, 2008, and within a few days, there was a circulating picture of the high scores that showed a sailing skill on it. It was confirmed shortly after by a JMod on the forums that there was in fact no sailing skill in the works, but people were convinced that that was a lie because Hunter and Summoning both had similar leaks to that, and they became skills after. And with that, the meme of sailing was officially born. Although I swear I feel like it was talked about even before 2008, but it's probably just my old memory serving me wrong. Okay, never mind. I was searching through old forums, and on Tippet, I saw this right here. Someone talking about sailing in 2006, so it at least goes back that long, if not even further back. Imagine legitimately making a research video and using this as one of your sources. My god, over 15 years later. When there were boats added to quests or new bodies of water added, people would make sailing jokes, and while nowadays it seems like most memes in the RS community go away after a couple days with the constant flow of new memes always coming in, I feel like sailing has just kind of always been something people like sort of always joke about, like Bodhi 73 or mobile coming winter 2017. On April 1st, 2014, when OSRS was just over a year old, they added sailing into the game. Of course, it was an April Fool's holiday event, but they actually put some effort into it considering the limited tools that they had at the time. There was an island you could travel to, and there was a whole level up table available available that you could view. And I think that really goes to show how much the meme lived on, that even Jagex recognized it in the game. Then almost a year and a half later, in September 2015, Jagex officially pulled sailing as a skill. And as you can see, it didn't pass since it only got 68% of the vote. So even with the 70% threshold that we have now, it still wouldn't have passed. But you got to keep in mind that the game was so much different back then. The average player used to be way more opposed to change than they are now. So I think the fact that it got 68% back then even really says a lot. It was still basically a new game, being pretty much 2.5 years old. It really just wasn't ready for a new skill, and even in retrospect, I really think it's for the best, because the skill would just not have had the resources back then that could be put into it today or in the future. Just for reference how bad it was the first few years of OSRS, I don't think the OSRS team even had an artist for like the first year or more, so all the models for new content was just reused or recolored assets. For example, the Kraken is just the Sea Troll Queen boss from Swansong recolored, or Nightmare Zone, which is literally just the KVD layer. Also, just think of the concept of what Nightmare Zone actually is. That was like the content of the year in 2013. Some might say, well, sailing failed a pull already, so Jagex can't pull it again. And to that, might I remind you about a certain item that was pulled twice already and failed both times. I'm sure Jagex will pull it again since they lowered the pass threshold, but that is neither here nor there. I think most players can agree that in terms of old school feel, sailing would win. Of course, people have nostalgia for other skills like dungeoneering or summoning because they have good memories training those skills as kids, but I wouldn't necessarily classify those as old school. But then again, being old school or not doesn't determine whether a skill would be a good fit for the game, because as we already established, OSRS in 2022 is very different than RuneScape in 2007 or OSRS in 2013. And that's a good thing, because there needs to be updates to the game to keep it alive, otherwise it'd be stale. I can promise you that if there were never any updates since the release of Old School, these servers would be long dead and we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. So everything I just went over is why I think the skill fits the nostalgic old school feel, and I think it'd be best to stay true to the roots of the game for whatever the new skill is going to be. And I haven't even gotten into explaining what the skill actually is or would be, so let's get into that. There's plenty of reasons to want or not want a new skill in general, or a specific skill, and Jagex recognizes that. In their recent blog post, they wrote down a list of reasons that people might want or not want a new skill. And let me just say, the fact that we even get a say in anything, much less pretty much everything, is actually wild. And the fact that nearly 10 years down the line, almost every decision is still decided by the player base is just crazy. But that's also the key for what I'm going to talk about next. What the sailing skill is it's the community. It's whatever we want it to be. When you say dungeoneering, summoning, invention, etc., people already know what those skills are. It would just be refit for old school to not be overpowered and not break the economy. But those skills have already been made. We know what the skills are, we know what to expect from them, and there's not much of a way to change that or change how the skills are in our heads without coming up with a new skill that's never been in any version of the game, in this case, sailing. Sailing can be whatever we decide we want it to be. It can be upgrading your boat, traveling to islands, exploring dungeons, fighting bosses, looting chests, which I think is the basic concept that most people have in their heads and they just base their decision off that. But I really think the skill can go a lot deeper than that. I'm going to keep saying this, but it can be whatever we want it to be. If we want dungeoneering, well, you can literally make dungeoneering part of the sailing skill when you go through dungeons on islands. We can literally just copy paste it from RS3 if we really want that. Of course, the rewards would be a bit different. If we want invention in the game, we can add like an untradeable currency on a new island that requires you to break down items and components. And with this new currency, maybe you can buy new items for your boat along with trading in logs or bars. Or maybe you can trade fish or weapons to islanders you meet to get their currency or obtain new gear from them. If we want summoning, then we can say that you explore islands and you capture pets that will stay with you temporarily when you go back to the mainland. And maybe that could involve the hunter skill too. See how all these skills kind of like could work together in sailing? These aren't even like really well thought out ideas. I'm just coming up with them right now on the fly because my mind is just moving a million miles a second. I'm sure you could think of even more fleshed out ideas with just a few minutes of thought. I'm just really trying to get everything out before I forget it because there's just so much. Or sailing Sailing could be literally just navigating your boat against the tide and then maybe finding other pirate ships, firing cannonballs at them and trying to defeat their ship. There could be a new type of PvP, like between ships, where you try to sink your enemy's ship. Or it could just be regular PvP, and maybe you team up with your friends, sailing around the Wildy to find other boats, and then you invade other ships, and you have fights inside the deep Wildy levels where you can't tele out from. If your boat's not good enough, you can make upgrades by getting skilling tasks, like Artisan. And you need to chop untradeable logs from new trees on islands or mine new rocks that give you untradeable ores. Like, there's so many ways to involve other skills that are in the game as well as skills that aren't in the game that a lot of people are talking about that they do want. Maybe you can discover an isolated island with a hermit farmer who can teach you the ways of animal husbandry, where it's an offset of farming and other skills where you raise animals for their resources, like cows for cow hides or baby dragons for bones or hides or something. Maybe you could have multiple boats that each specialize in different things, like some might be faster, some might be tankier if you're going through wildy areas, some might be bigger but slower so you could transport more goods for sailing quests or maybe for like a local currency or reward points. Some might be better for attacking if you want to like hunt people in the wilderness areas or for hunting and defeating other pirate ships. And maybe boats could degrade over time, which would require you to sink more resources into upkeeping them. Maybe someday you'll have a massive fleet of ships where you're upkeeping them or upkeeping workers like Miscellanea, but you're paying them in resources instead of GP. They can add new stuff for PVM too. I mean, dungeons, like I already said, I think that's the obvious thing, with new mobs or Slayer monsters or a new Slayer boss, or even Raids 4 could someday be on an island locked behind sailing. Man, I could just keep going on and on, but I think you get the point I'm trying to get across. I know some of those ideas are dumb and far-fetched, but I'm just spitballing off the top of my head. I'm just trying to make the point that there's nothing sailing has to be. It can and will be what we, the community, want it to be. And for that reason, that's why I think sailing would fit Old School RuneScape better than any other new skill. If sailing were to come to the game though, I only have one request, one simple request. Please let us take our boats to these islands to get the clue steps done faster.